after this conference. We're headed now into the last session, and this session really is aiming to be a wrap-up and an action-oriented discussion of the many things that have been tabled over the last day and a half or so. I think it's fair to say that we have determined and all embrace the fact that clinical trials are not separate from care. They're in fact an essential part of care. They offer patients access to innovation, better outcomes, and hope. But there is much work to be done. Rebecca, I've had you in my ear since last night, where it's almost daunting and overwhelming to know where best to start given the volume of work. And despite the fact that we believe in yet and we believe in hope, the work ahead is immense. And so this last panel is intending to bring and discuss some of the actions, particularly leveraging off of the CCS initiative that we discussed yesterday. So I'm going to invite Stephen Sundquist, who is also one of the co-chairs of this panel, to come on stage, who will lead the discussion, joined by Rebecca, Stuart, Stephanie, and Barry. And Michael. Michael, too.
I bet that's not your first mic drop, Rebecca. I said, I bet it's not your first mic drop.
Your mic drop.
Mic drop. Okay, we're all tired. I want to thank, first of all, Barry and Colorectal Cancer Canada yet again for bringing this amazing group collection of stakeholders and experts and knowledge leads in the clinical trial environment together, and me. I am Stephen Sundquist. I am the Executive Director of 3CTN, the Canadian Cancer Clinical Trials Network. I'm sorry I missed yesterday, but I have been fully informed on the rich discussion that took place and was well aware, of course, as a co-chair of the building of the sessions. I hope you all agree that the subject matter covered over the last couple of days hits many of the high priorities I hope that you came to discuss and have addressed. But this is the last opportunity for us as a collection of experts in the room and knowledge leads in the Canadian cancer trial environment and healthcare system to really, we hope, put together and assemble your input and the panel's input on how we go about addressing some of the priorities that have been identified, the opportunities that have come out from looking at, through Kurt, what's happening in Australia, but also domestically too, innovations that are taking place in trial, innovations in implementing care into research and research into care. So I had asked, and we did put up on screen, and I think we can put up again, the top 3 barriers that you have identified that you think need to be addressed. And we want to get into the guts of the how with this room and with this panel. So if we can have the responses to that question up. Thank you. Anyway, while that's coming up, if we look at system transformation and how we address the priorities that are reflected, for example, Stuart mentioned yesterday in the Clinical Trials Action Plan, what's it going to take, and what is the top, when we refer to this as a reference point, but also from your thoughts amongst the panelists, what's the low-hanging fruit? Where do we get started? I think we all get overwhelmed with the complexity of ideas and systemic barriers. But where can we have high impact now? And how can we go about achieving that? And that can inform our strategy going forward. So maybe Barry.
Okay, easy question, right?
I start with the easy one.
So I think that, the low-hanging fruit is local. So anything that we can demonstrate at a local level that either improves efficiency, improves access, and actually improves patient outcomes is really what we want to do first. Because if we can show it at a local level, then we can expand that to a provincial or a interprovincial, opportunity. And, last year, I just was thinking throughout this conference yesterday and today, that last year when we sort of raised this topic of research as care, care as research, when I say we, I say that very loosely, it was actually Rebecca that raised it. But we embraced it. It sounded so simple, right? And over the course of the last 2 days, we started to hear more and more barriers, about, how this can be accomplished, or how it might be accomplished, or what the facilitators might be, to enable it across the country. So I think that question is really good, because we have to demonstrate first that it works, and that we can do it in a smaller pilot or demonstration project at a local level, and then see how we can expand it. And I also think that we can't do it nationally. We have to start, like Kurt said in Australia, it was state by state adoption of it. So that said, I think we do need some sort of national overreaching strategy to buy into.
Right. Stuart's on stage for a reason, a lot of reasons. But Stuart, you presented yesterday the results of a broad sweep of stakeholders in the sector in Canada in terms of what's needed and what needs to be addressed. There's a lot of outputs from that. But could you speak to Barry's point in terms of securing and identifying what it is? I know, Barry, you said, having local or demonstrated examples of how we improve or move the needle on implementing research or improving clinical trials infrastructures. How, any thoughts on low-hanging fruit there?
Well, I do worry that there aren't many low-hanging fruit, if any, and that's part of the first challenge. I agree with Barry that I think it's about how we can build up those local initiatives and then demonstrate their value and then think about scaling them. I was really, you caught me smiling as Barry was talking, and it was really more about the kind of overarching approach that we need, the kind of a national approach that we need. And what struck me during the conversations yesterday was the idea that I feel we need federal government buy-in. We need the federal government to make clinical trials an imperative. So we need to build that case to the federal government, and not just through Health Canada, through Ministry of Health, but through other ministries as well. And I was even thinking about, well, we've done this before. We did it to have CPAC funded. We aligned all cancer organizations. We heard Michelle talk about it yesterday. That we've developed action plans, an action plan and action groups that allowed that strategy, the strategy for cancer control, to be funded by the federal government. And maybe that we have now with the clinical trials action plan that we're going to publish, maybe we have that action plan that we can start to align all the groups together on specific action items and make that case to government for government support.
Yeah, I suspect what is needed, and thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Barry. I'll just add my thoughts on this point, which is the reality check that when you go to government and we're talking about the federal government, and you have a conversation around investment in trials, we have to be really specific because there have been investments in trials. There's been massive investments in trials through CIHR, for example, in the formation of the clinical trials consortia, the ACT consortium, and investments in training platforms through CanTrain and others. So the audience, the receptive audience that we're talking to, I think we have to clarify what we mean when we're talking about support for trials, and back to the question of what it is and what specifically can we do now. Making the case for sustained funding, right? So we all work in the space, or those of us in Canada work in the space. We have investments from the government that are termed investments. They're 3 years. And then, you know, how they're put together, who is, you know, how those, do you give enough time for those to develop, to mature, to demonstrate evidence, to show what's working, what's not? You know, we're not even at the learning health system level. We're trying to implement basic beginner steps in terms of trial infrastructure and trial support. So if we look at the investments that have been made, how do we leverage those? Maybe that's a question for the panel as a starting point and to build on Stuart's answer. Anyone want to take that?
I can. I'm going to be a little bit negative, though. So
provocative is good.
I'm going to be a little bit negative. So appreciate the point made by Stuart with respect to CPAC, right, and that this strategy could be viewed in the same way. Your point is about existing investments, right? And so let's take a step back and take a look at what was done. So in response to the pandemic, right, we built up our biomanufacturing capacity. We invested $500 million dollars in increasing that, right, through the CBRIF and the BRIF program. Alongside that came much needed investment in CTF to address some of those structural issues. So for example, what Susan is working on in ACT, and that has been great, in addition to project funding for clinical trials, which is good. At the same time, the government has undertaken a study to take a look at the effectiveness of its investments in COVID. They were not pleased. The results were not good. Very few of those programs ended up with, for example, therapeutics that were actually being tested in people. What does that tell us about now we're asking for money for clinical trials when obviously there's a bit of a disconnect there? So I raise this to you, that we have to think about how to position this very, very carefully. I have ideas. So there's an AI strategy, right? And there have been a number of, a few AI strategies, and more is to come. More importantly, there's a lot of excitement, right? Great language being used right now by especially the province of Ontario with respect to the diversity of the EMR data that exists within it. And they're thinking about how do we leverage this for clinical trials. Let's make the linkage to strategies that are under development with respect to AI. There's a genomics strategy as well. Let's get Genome Canada into the room and connect the dots for these individuals. None of these groups can exist in silos. They will 100% need clinical trial infrastructure that is working really, really well, that will be working even better because of the great work that's going to be done by CTO, the great work that's going to be done by a number of folks here in this room. But we need to connect the dots and provide, you know, this holistic viewpoint of how this can work for the country. In addition to, and to your point on sustained funding, I would argue we're going to have to make the case for achieving some kind of sustainability, right?
And a mechanism for doing that.
And make the business case, but we need investment now. And I think it was, I forget who it was, maybe it was yesterday, maybe, I've had a lot of meetings this week. We don't question at all, or the government, you know, lets us know that they're going to be investing $16 billion in new highways, right? And it just happens because all of us, drive our cars and need access to a great highway. There's something to be learned there about what we need in this system, in this healthcare system, to work better. Last thing, one of the gaps that I saw in the questions that were listed here in the responses is that, and thank you, Jason, and I'm looking at you, there was nothing about patients, right, and their experience in the system, and how do we get the pull from the population asking for this and make it about improving their experience with healthcare. Let's work on that piece as well so that we have as many pulls as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. I would add lots to think about, but I think in terms of practical steps too, basing my thoughts on the conversations that this conference has brought to the surface again on data and evidence. So using and collecting and sharing information from investments that have taken place to show the impact.
The need, right?
Right.
And because they will need this infrastructure. If we're going to achieve this
Mm-hmm.
goal of Canada becoming a research superpower, and I'm quoting here, they are going to need the work of everybody in this room to make that happen. And so let's build up that convincing case, again, connecting all of those dots and make it really easy for them.
I don't draw a paycheck from CCS, but I will draw attention to the fact that you're actually putting together a letter to Finance, Ministry of Finance, correct? At this point in time, you're calling on folks to on what's needed in the benefit of trials and to the minister.
Yeah, we're absolutely considering doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be a way or a mechanism, perhaps. I'm just calling out for those in the room to add their priorities to that call. Just a thought. Okay, well, thank you very much. Anyone else from the panel want to contribute to that response in terms of how we go about this? Rebecca.
Yeah, I think I certainly feel a bit overwhelmed with the magnitude of the problems and the barriers. But I think one is that how is important, but I think we still need to start with why. And I will always go back to that because people don't change because of data. They change because they truly believe that this is the right thing to do. And the why is different depending on who you're talking to. There might be a health research industry why for the government, but the why for your hospital might be focused on patients. So I think if we can just make sure that we articulate that why and how important it is to integrate research into care, even when we have such challenges in our healthcare system, like it still has to be in there. In terms of the how, I think we need one plan, one voice. I said that at the very beginning. But that plan doesn't only have to be federal or provincial or local. There's a lot of people who are interested in doing this work. So it's not so much that we shouldn't be doing, we should have a federal strategy, we should have a provincial strategy, we should have a strategy that empowers people like me, VPRs, to make sure that we can work locally. And then a public engagement strategy, so maybe we need 4 different strategies, but the problem is it can't be 4 strategies led by 4 different groups. It has to be one group with all the stakeholders that need to be at the table. Then and there's going to have to be some compromise. No, you not everyone can have everything that they want.
Right.
So I wonder if that is the way to go. Everyone together, one plan, one voice, but that plan has, 4 prongs to it maybe.
And creating an overarching identity around that plan or a public face of that plan would be really important, along with avenues in for those different stakeholders. And I guess I would imagine, too, the importance of different messaging. We in our space do a lot of things really well. Marketing perhaps isn't our strength. Anne-Marie's got lots of thoughts on that, so I'll leave that to you. But how do we make that, I'm not asking, more of a rhetorical question, but how we make that, that call to those different stakeholders and how those stakeholders can see themselves in that plan and align on that plan is the challenge. Michael.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to tag on to what Rebecca was saying in terms of the how, the why. So interestingly enough, so I've worked in the innovation space, I think it's like 5 years now. Interestingly enough, in the innovation space, so our job as an innovation team at the pharmaceutical company is to solve these big, huge, complex challenges of our organization. They deploy us into the impossible, this sort of really cool thing that we talk about. And over the years, we've learned that sort of the most powerful partner to why isn't how, because how changes throughout the entire time you're trying to solve. The most powerful partner to why is when. So the sooner you can start something, the sooner you start digging into all of the challenges, all of the issues that you've never even thought about before. And so we take sort of this very quote-unquote agile approach to solving these problems and saying, if you understand why you need to solve something, just go and do it. You will discover more issues that you have to solve along the way. That changes your how. That changes your how the entire time that you're doing it. So I think we just had this conversation to say we've had a couple of years now of discussing and discovering and looking at all these problems and looking at different examples in Australia and at Duke and all of these different examples around the world. People are solving these issues. People are diving in and solving these problems. We're still having the conversation. I think it's time we move to when.
We're good at that.
Yeah, I think it's time for us to move, and I think this is the power of this conference here. It's small, but it's mighty. I think the action-oriented nature of this conference, I think to Rebecca's point, like the passion is there. It's all encompassed here, but if we can lean on that and just start something, maybe local, maybe provincial, but just start something, I think it's time.
Just Barry wants to add to that, and I think rightly so, and just building on Rebecca's point too, and yours too, Michael, acknowledging that in that stakeholder group that you mentioned, Rebecca, the public is a key stakeholder, but patient groups play an incredibly informed, passionate role in that. So, Barry.
So we did the why, the when, the how. What is it that we want? We have to come to a point when we're facing a minister or somebody who's holding the purse strings, who's going to say, so what do you want? Like specifically, what can I do today? So the when, and I know the why, but what is it that we could ask for that is that low-hanging fruit early?
There are, I guess you're not asking me, but I can answer.
Asking you.
Let me throw one out there, because I don't think the answer is obviously one thing. But one example that's a tangible, relatable, appeals to everybody is something that was brought up earlier today, which is the examples of the public awareness campaigns that exist around trials. We have misinformation still around trials. Not just what trials are, but the value of trials, the opportunities around trials. There's been, Australia, I was mentioning to Kurt, has an excellent campaign that was brought up at another conference I was at recently, where there's a compelling question to the public at large around, it was almost a challenge, like if you don't know anything about a trial, you're missing out. So it addresses that, and you're missing out on what? You're missing out on access to innovative therapies. You're missing out on opportunities for that access. You're missing out on, they don't use better surveillance, but you're missing out on highest quality standards of care. So you make a compelling argument. So that would be one that I would say is unify. And I know that the ACT consortium I brought up before had identified the Be the Cure program. Susan, I believe, was the partner in that consortium, but nationalizing and building those different siloed provincial initiatives to a more powerful, unifying call, or at least maybe not a call to action, but backing up on that, an awareness campaign that sows the seeds of awareness of trials that can have collateral benefits in terms of patients discussing trials with their providers, an appeal or a call that addresses the healthcare system and healthcare providers and those that refer to trials. So you generate a market for trials amongst patients who are asking, who are coming, and compelling those that might be change resistant in the system to really give some thought to trials. Site leads, institution heads who might not prioritize it, to Rebecca's point, making a bed available. But if there's a culture of research that's driven from the bottom, I don't want to say the bottom up, but the bottom up, from the groundswell of support, that's one. I don't know. Anyone else have a low-hanging opportunity?
I'm just wondering if I can ask a question. So again, this may come out of naivety, but the question is, knowing that we're not going to solve every single problem that has been brought up here, so we're gonna eat this elephant one bite at a time. What would be wrong with picking, call it one hospital? So one hospital or one province, but let's start with one hospital and saying, there are groups in this audience right now, there's groups across Canada that are funded to do lots of these different things that we've been talking about here. Training, they've been funded to build infrastructure, they've been funded to do data analytics, they've been funded to do lots of these things. But what if we got all of these different groups to throw their might into this one hospital and then just show that it could be done, that we've integrated research into care at that one hospital with institutional leadership buy-in, and use this as our flagship example? The question would be, how long would that take, just to show that it's an example of what could be done in a very small prototype demonstration? Why can't we do that?
There's ways to do that. Pick a winning partner.
Well, we only have one person here from a hospital.
We're not going to solve, but these are important ideas.
We'll sign up in Ottawa. Yeah, we'll be the pilot study. Yeah. I've often thought that we need a Canadian research hospital, like a Canadian National Institute of Health, but that's a little bit of a different question.
It is a different question.
I do want to bring up the question of competition. What I've noticed is like a lot of the innovation comes from the Minister of Innovation and Economy in different provinces who want to promote investment in life sciences. But the Minister of Innovation in Quebec doesn't have the same goal as the one in Ontario, Alberta, or BC. In fact, they're in competition. So I think that that's also part of the solution. How do we convince those ministers of innovation and economies to work together, bring down those barriers in the interest of promoting even in their own provinces? And I think that, who said follow the money at one point during the conference? I mean, that might be
also respect
an opportunity.
Respect how they make decisions and on what basis and who's behind their policy or their priority setting. And again, there's the direct approach from discussions with those parties and those ministers, and there's also a way of influencing them that should be considered. Right. This is the part of the panel where I'd like to suggest that if you have questions that you want to bring to us or thoughts on this discussion, inviting you to the microphone to also contribute. So this will be just throughout the remainder of the session. So give some thought to that and feel free to step up if you have any input on what those priorities should be. Any other thoughts from the panel while we're waiting on that?
I'm curious from the audience who you think, if we were working at this together, who would be the first person that you would approach in Canada to break down these barriers and to implement an approach? Who would that person or persons or department be? Any ideas?
Rebecca?
Can't hear you.
Oh, Kurt mentioned, that's very loud, Australia's Chief Science Officer, I think was the phrase, which, do we have something like that? Like, I said yes, and whoever is at the top of
We have a Chief Science Advisor, but she is responsible for the federal scientists, really.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't believe that we have a similar position.
Too bad.
Yeah.
And the other thought I had while you guys were talking about choosing one hospital, it reminded me, does anyone remember the CIHR competition called Rewarding Success? It was about the learning health system. It was yonks ago, like 2009 probably. And it was all about bringing together from the outset of coming up, conceptualizing the research project, not just the investigator, but also the patient partners, the decision maker, i.e. the payer at the end of the day, and clinicians, and bringing all of those individuals and perspectives onto the research team to devise the project such that in the end, whatever is learned should, in principle, be taken up by the system. So just to say, I don't know if anyone knows what happened to that, but it was a great idea, I thought.
Actually, well, thanks, Rebecca. Actually, we'll dig that up. This is also recorded, so we'll have that on record as something we can follow up on. When we look at CHR and investments, and I see Susan's at the mic, and thank you. There are opportunities to leverage what investments have already been made. So part of the ACT consortium, for example, has been to support the development of research infrastructure and trial infrastructure and capacity at regional health centers. So as a party to that idea or that concept, there's a way of connecting perhaps that dot, or have those be affiliated institutions to a research institute's initiative or priorities around becoming that research center of excellence. Susan.
I was just, when you're talking about having a sample hospital, moving things forward, and I was at a conference in the States recently. It was a medical device conference, and meeting different people, and one I'm not going to get it right, but it's a Methodist hospital in Phoenix or something like this, but it was a hospital with a catchment area of 100,000 patients. And their plan and activities around innovation research were so impressive. Like, it was, the ethos of this organization, that they were about innovation and research. And, and I was talking about challenges we have. So we like to try and attract, companies to come to Ontario and to Canada and do clinical trials. And then often they say, yes, we'd really like to. We want to do a trial on this. Can you help us find sites? We reach out to sites. And the investigators will sometimes, most of the time, quite frankly, say we're too busy, not interested. By the way, this isn't a knock on investigators. They are too busy, and they have to decide what they're interested in. But I was talking to this fellow about that and how they address it. So they really have this culture of working with all of the investigators, like the physician, potential investigators, all the time, right? Like, they're inculcating this culture of research built into the practice of the hospital. So I'm just thinking there are probably good examples, like we can start examples, but there were probably some pretty cool ones that we can look at where it's been done pretty well already.
Right. I think, and also just having that capacity to take those models and Canadianize them and try to address some of those systemic challenges, things like reimbursement, interprovincial access, that sort of thing. That's a good suggestion. Rebecca.
Wanted to respond to that because I think it is such an important point. And I know I was telling Stephanie earlier today at the OHRI, Dean's been leading sort of a creation of clinical trials support office at the OHRI for exactly this reason, right? And it's because so when we met with all 16 clinical trials units, I would say 60% of them said we are turning trials away all the time, many trials. So actually, marketing isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is, and then when you ask each unit what's the reason, the reasons are different for each unit. One is we don't have any more desk space to hire more CRAs. But who's responsible for giving them space? Because the research institute doesn't have its own space, right? It's the hospital, or it's we can't get an overnight bed. So hence the comment I made earlier about trying to work with the hospital to get the bed. So what we were trying to do is create an office that would take some of this burden away from the investigators, so that they're asked if they want to do a trial, and they say, I'd like to do the trial, but I got 175 Epic messages to answer, and I've got soccer practice at 8 p.m. So if we can take that burden off them, and as an institute organize that, And that is where we need that funding. That is where that 15% that your units get per contract could really help. And then having our CEO, who's really on board, I have to say, but if he had actual provincial metrics that he had to report on to say, then he would be really invested in getting that desk space for those CRAs, because then he knows he can get more trials in, and that's a metric that matters for his bonus.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'll share a little bit about on the metrics topic. I used to work for the Ontario Stroke Network. There were metrics established, 20 metrics, 20 KPIs that all of the LHINs in Ontario, if you're not familiar with Ontario at the time, had as standardized for reporting, and that was tied to supportive funding. So, and in an inverted way that we normally think about. So underperforming centers actually received doubled down additional funding support and other supports to improve their metrics. So there was an incentive to be transparent. There was actually a benefit, a system benefit as well. So it's a different way of thinking, but yeah. And then using that office that you're referring to, that central support office, to help spur innovations, things like decentralized trials implementation, right? Leveraging or distributing trial loads across centers rather than worrying about whether that site or that investigator can open a trial, right? Distribute the load, you can make it better. I'm actually on a platform here, but I'm actually on a platform, so it's okay. But the ability to and accept that we don't have a large population, that it's scattered. There's a lot of rural, remote, harder to access populations, but we also have established care networks within our institutions, and leaning into those established care pathways and adding a trial layer onto that and a support for the ability to conduct trials through and systems investments that are already taking place. So good point. Question.
Question, comment, discussion. Guess we'll see what happens. So
I'm excited.
The discussion. I know. I should plan these things out a little bit better. After 2 days, I feel very comfortable with everybody, I guess. So as you were talking, I was thinking about, well, this government's agenda. This government's agenda has 7 priorities. It's department agnostic. It's just, this is what we're going to do. And everybody needs to orient in that direction. This is mission-driven, Mariana Mazzucato kind of thinking. Cool has nothing to do with health. And so as I think about what the list of priorities are, or lists that I've seen in the past, or the discussions here and in other places about different parts of the system, I wonder if we all understand what our responsibilities are. And have we first looked inside our organizations to say, when I look at this priority list, am I prepared to actively jump in this moment and participate in a working group or in problem solving? Have I already done what I need to do in my organization? And I don't know if that's maybe one of the places where we need to start.
Or is your organization equipped to do that at all?
Well, then again, my background
rhetorical
is...
question. Yeah.
So, I'm sorry?
A rhetorical point, not so much.
Well, it's just that there's always more patient partnerships to be had. There's always more understanding to be done. But at some point, we've understood, and I think I've heard similar discussions here as I did last year. And so what I'm wondering is, if there's a commitment that we can all make to figuring out in our organizations, by next year, where should we be? And maybe it's not activity across, but maybe it's in our own institutions to be ready for the next step. Mm-hmm. Because it's really easy to say we should do this and we should start an initiative, but we have to take something off of our plates. My boss is on the stage, so I just think about all the work that we have to do, and I think about, what are we going to take off our plate? Because there's only so many hours in a day, right. And there's only so many pilot projects, and at some point it needs to move past. And I'm wondering if we've tried initiatives in the past, if maybe we need to take a step back and look at ourselves first, and our organizations, and where we're situated, and if we are the friction. And I'm not saying this about my organization, and most of my background is federal government, so yeah. I think I'm used to feeling like the friction.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm looking to the panel. Michael's got his hands up.
Yeah, no, I think, like, I love the point, but I think it goes back to Barry's question of, do we know what it is that we're asking for whoever the funder is, whether it's the government, whether it's other people, to volunteer their time and energy and effort into solving this problem? Do we even know what we're asking them or what we're trying to build? Or let's take this concept of we're going to build Canada's premier research hospital, and it's a hospital that's built on the foundation of research as care. Do we know what it takes to build that hospital, and do we know what it takes to build the infrastructure? And then we can start looking at everybody here and saying, this is what we need from you. We may not even need government funding if there's enough funded, resources out there and effort, and players who are willing to come to the table to help the Ottawa Hospital become Canada's premier research hospital.
You heard it here first.
And we may be able to do it, but I don't think we've fleshed out what that looks like yet.
But I think we fleshed out some persistent problems.
Yeah, and
data, identifying data. Are we holding on to data that should be somewhere? Interoperability. Do we work in systems that need something more? People that are within the system that need training. Do we know our staff and who needs what?
I think we fleshed it out at a level that, at a much bigger level than we need it to make the Ottawa Hospital the premier research hospital in Canada.
Okay, so I didn't know that was the objective.
So one of the things I guess I can address, and I do want to feel like a bit like a broken record, but there was an extensive consultation, maybe didn't ask all of the questions and frame them in the way to organizations that you're articulating, which is excellent. But the consultation process that went into the development of the Clinical Trials Action Plan isn't complete, but it's a start, right?
Yeah, and if that's the start, then are we ready to engage in it, I guess is my question. If that's our starting point, can everyone look at that starting point and say, am I ready to engage with that right now?
Well, that's the process that I think I can fairly say when I say we, the folks involved in that initiative at CCS and all the stakeholders, and I should just defer to Rebecca and Stuart on this, but that's the intent as I understand it, yes.
So, and I guess maybe just to clarify, does that mean that all of the other stakeholders in the ecosystem are aware that that is the starting point and they should then reflect? I understand
I think that's
that people
the
that
next
were
step.
involved.
You're articulating what will be the next step, which is framing those recommendations and the plan and a mechanism for how to create a fulsome strategy and buy-in. I think what you're talking about is that buy-in and continued buy-in and self-reflection in that strategy. So organizations, groups can see their role in it, be contributing to it, and have an open connection to the progress being made as that strategy plays out and evolves, because it is not going to be a static vision of or the vision that's static right now will evolve and will incorporate elements that will take longer to germinate, will require more complexity. Those elements of the strategy that have been highlighted in the plan will play out over the years. So this is a long-term process. If you look at the Australian example, it's a 30-year vision essentially that has resulted in where they've come to. So I think we're playing a long game here. But just wanted to defer first to Rebecca and Stuart if you wanted to comment on that. Thank you.
I don't have anything to add. That was perfect, Stephen. Thank you for that.
Oh, okay. Anything that you wanted to add?
I would just say that I think that there are some stakeholders that have never been in the room, and I think probably be very challenging to get in the room. Things like the actual CEOs of the hospital. So, but that doesn't mean that they aren't engaged. But we would go to them, right? We're not going to expect them to come. But they have forums, and I can tell you, at least in Ontario, the OHRI CEOs are incredibly invested in this clinical trials concept and the sort of potential that it brings to their hospitals in terms of revenue, which I don't think they're not seeing it as a way to pay for things they can't pay for, but they're seeing it as a revenue stream. They're seeing it as an important thing for their patient population, and also for recruitment, right? So this issue around, we couldn't recruit psychiatrists at the Ottawa Hospital, but when we built a research program around psychiatry, we suddenly could recruit psychiatrists and then fellows and then actual PhD and postdoctoral fellows in the space too. So they're seeing all of the pluses, but we'll need to go to them and sort of say, well, what is it that you need? What are the stories that you need us to tell that will make it so that this is on your priority list as a hospital CEO?
Thank you. Natasha.
Thank you. So this is in a bit of a different lens or a bit of a different direction, but it seems to tie well together with what Anu had brought up as well and what we just finished discussing, is that I'm in a room here with individuals that I've probably seen for the past 15 years. We've mentioned the same elements. There seems to be a bit of repetition around the themes and about what the challenges are and what possible directions are. And I think part of that is because we don't have a central repository for all these great reports and initiatives that have happened in the past. In fact, this morning I turned to Rebecca and I said, do you remember that report that was telling academic centers how they could maybe try to reduce the barriers for regulatory approvals? And we both, it seemed familiar, but we just couldn't remember which one it was. So I don't know if this is a first step of a low-hanging fruit, maybe for 3CTN, maybe for CTO, to just create a repository of all these reports that we know exist from the past 15 years. We could use AI to maybe summarize them so the hospital C-level suite would have an understanding of the historical genesis of all of these elements and how we're repeating the same themes. But then also, we no longer have to be the memory keepers because I know my memory is starting to go.
That's an excellent suggestion. Thank you. Yeah, and I think a common problem that we all in the room have come across, which is scratching our head in a country that is probably leading in its development and conduct of pilots and projects and at the system level. I look to assets like the value of networks, for example, to fulfill that function, really that housing that information, that repository of information. There's assets like the trial asset map. It would be an extended version of that, perhaps, where there is that learning system where you can access and identify using modern tools like AI to scrub and pull that information. No, thank you. Any thoughts from the panel on that?
It is such a Canadian problem. I encounter this everywhere, right? The number of reports that sit on shelves that are unacted upon, and invariably, 3 to 4 years later, I see another study being struck, perhaps a little bit different, but basically a rehash. It's a huge issue. I hope AI can save us, and we can just feed it and produce a one-page summary to say, it's already been done, we're here to speak to you about action. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a Canadian problem.
It can overcome a huge barrier to the work in the first place, and obviously you want to leverage the learnings from that, but the scarce time investment that researchers have both for sourcing relevant findings and learnings, but repeating that lesson or that investigation. Rebecca.
If I could make a comment somewhat related to that too, because I recently had the opportunity to meet with David Naylor, and of course I hadn't read the report from 2015. It's not that long ago, but it's a decade ago, and so I did, and it's quite remarkable how, the word is innovation, but the concepts are the same. The issues with the provinces are exactly the same. The call for a directed investment and an arm's length agency, everything is sort of exactly the same. And so we actually had met with Health Canada, and they were sort of like, wow, all this, even Health Canada was like this, so, we pulled this report out in preparation for this meeting. So sounds like it happens at the government level too. So I guess one of my questions was, how do we interact with innovation? Because I honestly think innovation, as Anu said, it's a word that anyone can use for anything as far as I can tell. But clinical trials really are. I mean, it's the translation of discovery through clinical care. It's not that different than innovation. And do we reframe some of what we do in that innovation concept so that it looks different, but it's still the same? I
think back to your earlier point about different stakeholders and different stakeholder groups that are going to be party to or receptors to the messaging around this, an initiative or a pan-Canadian initiative to support embedding trials in care. So I think positioning it to those audience, that audience would be an important point. Stuart, did you ever hand up?
Just wanted to comment on the different reports that have been made over the years. And interestingly, the Naylor report was what really started our journey to develop the Clinical Trials Action Plan. We looked at the Naylor report, worked out, had a discussion about what the gaps were, and then landed on clinical trials as being a significant gap and the one that we actually felt that we could get some traction on. In terms of, we talked about yesterday about the consultation process we developed in developing the action plan. We also did a thorough kind of review of a lot of the other reports and initiatives that have gone on in the country, and we did this kind of painstaking map of kind of like all the priorities that were being developed in other reports, and then try to align our priorities with them as well. So hopefully that when you see the report, you'll see that comes through. There is a kind of a list of all the other major reports that have come out for the last 10 to 15 years on clinical trials. So we did take that into account in this.
And Rebecca's point noted on the innovation lens and tying that into the messaging, I think it could be really key. So I'm actually experiencing your role now. So we have Anne-Marie and we also have Louise.
It's reversed now, Stephen.
Yeah. But I think you can have it back. So Anne-Marie, and then we'll have Louise.
Yeah, thank you. And I was struck by two comments, and I felt very compelled to offer some experiences I've had, and I've shared loosely with a couple of you related to the development of women's health strategy in Canada in a group. And I will tell you that they are very dynamic, very mighty, and they do not have the kind of data and power that this group has. But they've done a couple of things that I think are very defining and useful for this exercise to allow us to take Michael's point, take a step. And to Barry's point, which was, where do we start? Because sometimes the waters are so deep and overwhelming here that it becomes difficult to know where to go first. So from what I can see and what I've heard, all of the puzzle pieces are fundamentally in place to take the first step. And that first step that this Women's Health Strategy Group has done is to organize about 25 different women's health organizations to do exactly what CCS has already done beautifully, to understand where some of the priorities and the thinking are, to put somebody as the chief boss, the chief voice, to create a governance structure on roles and responsibilities of these 25 or 30 different groups, and to mobilize, number one. They have created also a very high-level framework on what they want. And they've got some very specific asks. And they have also created what I call the branded economic story. There's a million ways you can enter this story, but they've branded the economic story because that's what the government wants to hear right now. So I think all of those puzzle pieces have been beautifully created already out of the CCS report. They have also gone and used templates out of the UK, which has a very prolific women's health strategy where the business case was developed, et cetera, et cetera. Kirk has helped us so much in giving us that case study for Canada. And then the third thing they've done is they got a couple of senators that were passionate about this subject, who are on fire and getting other MPs involved. And I know, Stuart, you were saying that you've got just a beautiful GR group to do that, but they've simply started by planting seeds and lighting people on fire. And they're doing so beautifully because it's a hot topic and people want this. So those senators, in fact, are then involving MPs, and those MPs are then aiming to involve the bureaucracy. So they kind of stayed out of the bureaucracy. They went around the bureaucracy, not with intention of leaving them out, but to be able to go backwards, to go forwards a little bit, to not get stalled out, which really became a very useful thing. And they've been able to, and are in the process of securing a day on the Hill, where they will invite MPs, a lot of government officials, to really talk about the reason why we need a women's health strategy in Canada. So fundamentally, it just seemed like a really simple, of course it's complicated, it's a lot of work, but it was the way they approached this was fairly simplistically. They went grassroots, they started small, they know that they haven't got it all comprehensively figured out, but they've got enough of the story to be able to tell it beautifully.
Thank you. I think with some, just so many things to respond to. Thank you so much, Henry. But looking at the successes of the women's health group and the benefits perhaps of a synergistic strategy where that group sees themselves as a key player, not a part of a larger collective whole, and self-identifies what they bring to the table, ensuring that I don't want to be Pollyannic, but that their mandate, their strategic priorities, their funding pieces are part of the conversation, but can simplify, I think, the messaging. One of the other benefits to what you're saying could be, because again, I'm thinking about the advocacy piece or the GR piece to government, where you've got a very narrow or limited number of ears that you can, and time to get access to those policymakers and ministers, that paint for them an aligned strategy, help them see where the respective voices they're talking to or representatives are talking to fit into a collective whole, and if there's money being discussed at the budget levels, that there's an understanding on their part how that can be allocated more simply and equitably to those groups. Again, not the how is the all important, but I think for me it starts with that exercise we've been talking about having organizations and groups see themselves and contribute to that strategy, that bigger strategy. Will have elements.
High tides float all boats.
What's that?
High tides float all boats, right?
Okay, yeah. Well said.
Everybody kind of put. What was that? There was a music video that was created. Everybody park your ego at the door and make a contribution to, I think it was We Are the World, right? So high tides float all boats.
Yeah, and there's a way to make it happen.
It's a real mantra to this
Trust.
group.
Yeah. Thank you. Panel, any comments on that before we go to Louise? No? Well said. Thank you, Emery. Louise.
Thank you. Everything that I've heard in this panel is what we want to take to other stakeholders to get them to come on board. And I always think that we should be leading by example. So one of the 7 processes priorities that I wrote down from your list was streamlining processes. And I really think that we should take the lead and take one process, like the national REB, and wrestle it to the ground, because then we can go to anybody and say, we're putting not money, but we're putting our efforts where we want you to put your efforts. So that's one thing I would say. Just take it simply, just simply. And the other thing is, with all due respect to the public, I think the public is busy thinking about other things right now. And if I were educating anybody, I'd be educating the patients. Because if you don't get the patients and the patient groups aligned behind this, everybody else can be aligned, but you won't get anywhere.
Thanks, Louise.
Yeah, I think that's a really great comment, by the way, Louise. And I'm sure Sue's very happy about that, too. But I think that's a really good test as well at the same time. If you want to bring about change, there's two ways usually that bring about change. One is because it's very painful if you don't change, and the other is because you have an incentive that's very, enriching, or maybe it's, you'll make money from it somehow. It'll be more resourceful, or your patients will do better. So either an incentive or disincentive to bring about change. And I know that some of the problems that Canada Review is having is getting buy-in from all the provinces. Some will say, no, it's a legal issue. They could change the laws. Laws have been changed before. Some will say, we don't want to, for whatever reason that they have. So I think if we took an example like that, and Can Review being one, what is the incentive to do it? And how do we incentivize the provinces to buy into that? And on the other hand, how do we disincentivize those who don't want to buy into it? So I know it's a little bit of bullying and a little bit of carrot and stick, but if we want to bring about change, those are the types of factors that you need in order to do that. Otherwise, what we're going to have is we'll have some who say yes and some who say no, and we won't have a national platform. So I think it's a good example. I mean, I'm sure there are other ones as well, but we should start thinking in terms of what is the incentive for provinces to do this. Everything is about the timing, as most of you know. The timing is now to break down the barriers between the provinces. The Prime Minister says so it must be so. And we just have to get those provinces on board.
Thank you, Barry. I'm going to actually, we are at time, but I am going to give Brian.
Oh, you can't refuse him.
He's earned the right, so you have the honor of the last question for the panel.
Yeah, I guess I still didn't exceed my speaking time even with the presentation, but wanted to pick up, Michael, on your idea about focusing on one particular hospital, one particular site, and we talked a little bit about the just-in-time model, and so maybe that looks like it's one hospital, maybe it's the Sky Dome in Toronto if you want to make it a little bit more of an accessible environment, just spitballing, but maybe then you can think about some of the other regional partners that could be start to get ready and come online for a particular decentralized trial. And thinking about also kind of decentralized has multiple meanings. There is also some centralization when it comes to trials. So what pieces need to be kind of out of that core hospital versus what can be kind of a little bit spread out. And this is something that Duke has wrestled with. I'm reminded that the Office of Clinical Research within Duke is less than 15 years old and was created as part of like a strategic refresh to be able to connect further into North Carolina. And then the other element would be the telehealth piece, which I think saw kind of an explosion of interest in COVID, but obviously as a way of kind of enabling some of that decentralization, kind of in parallel to that, the idea of sort of remote monitoring and kind of what needs to be done on site versus what can be sort of centralized. So I knew I threw a lot at you there at the end.
Lots of great suggestions. Noting the telehealth and DCT piece, a shout out to the province of Newfoundland, who was, which actually was one of the innovators globally in introducing telemedicine, telehealth. So we have examples here locally. We have demonstrated capacity, and I think there is a potential here for that. I'm going to turn the mic over. First of all, I want to thank the panelists. Thank you all for your contribution. And I want to thank you all for your patience and attention. This has been a full day, another rich day of conversations. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Anne-Marie, or actually to Barry, to wrap things up. So, close out. Okay, I'll let the panels step down. Thank you.
You would share a few words that capture your main takeaway from this conference.
Is it not working, or is everybody too tired to vote now? Back to the Jays. So central to all the comments is get started, do something. Don't just sit there stupid, do something. So I think that, yeah, collective action, one bite at a time. No more reports. Time is now, and collective action. So I think that those really are the takeaways that we talked about throughout the conference, that we have to speak with one voice, that we need to, I think we have the why, but we still have to reflect the why in our ask. How we do it, we have a little bit of an idea with the plan. I'm not sure how it will appeal to each and every province, but it certainly is a federal ask, a national ask. When? I think the time is now. I think the time is now because of the situation we find ourselves on, and the fact is that the federal government and the provinces seem to have some incentive to break down barriers between the provinces. How we do this, I think, is going to be really, very important, because if we don't show success early on and we don't have that continued action, we'll lose momentum and it'll all fall apart. So it really is important, I think. Obviously, we're quite dependent on the report for CCS in all our discussions today. I think that there's 30 action items in there. Once we do it one bite at a time, as some people have suggested here, we will make progress. And perhaps that progress, as Stephen said, maybe we need to attack the low-hanging fruit first of those 30 recommendations or action points. But we have to show progress as we go along. Because if we don't show progress, and we don't show that we can actually do something, it's same old. But I think it's incumbent upon us also to utilize the investments that have already been made in ACT, CanTrain, all the programs that the federal government is invested in. Otherwise, they will see that as lost money. And if they see that as lost money, then we lose our argument to say why they should invest in this. But I want to come back to the incentive. I think it's so important. You know, I was listening to Olivier before, and also about Life Science Ontario. Each province has their own interest in developing their own life science industry, their own hospitals, their own clinical trials, and so forth. So what's in it for them? And I think we have to clearly demonstrate that there is incentive for each of the provinces to collaborate under some sort of national, let's just call it interprovincial, to be politically correct in our country, and work together. So I'm hoping, I mean, not everybody is in the room from yesterday, of course, or even from today, but I think what we can do is we can reach out, and perhaps at CTO's conference and at other conferences as they happen throughout the year, to build momentum around a plan of action. But we somehow need to have a forum where we can communicate in. We can talk about this after. We're not, as I said, we're not resolving everything in one day. But I did notice that in Australia there was this sort of collective action, this forum that was created. I forget what it was called, but a national sort of initiative under which everybody coalesced. And that's what we did. Everybody's referring to CPAC as an example. And when we were, I can't even remember what we called it, when we were making the call to action for some sort of national cancer strategy. Actually, I think that's what it was called, the National Cancer Strategy at the time, and developed into CPAC with some political motivation. That change occurred. But some people may point to CPAC and say, well, what have they done? What is the, what have they implemented? Because clinical trials is somewhat different, right? It's not a strategy, it's a implementation, an action, a call to action for something to actually happen, do these clinical trials in the country. So I think that there is a little bit of a difference in that we're not just trying to create a partnership or a strategy so much as really implement change and capitalize on what exists already in the country and make it better. So I am hoping that by next year's conference, we'll have something to report on, the progress that we make throughout the year. And as I say at every conference, it's wonderful to get together and talk about what we want to do, but it'll be even better next year to talk about what we've accomplished throughout the year. So I'm looking forward to a great year of action together and seeing how we can collaborate. And I thank you all for being here. Thank you to all of our speakers and presenters and panelists for not only for being here and taking the time to be with us, but for your initiatives throughout the year. And of course, thank you once again to all of our sponsors, without whom we wouldn't even be here today. So enjoy the rest of the day, and look forward to speaking to you all.